So at this point, Mizusu is dying because now she is becoming too close with Yukito, and the curse is now in full effect. Later, we also get some more stuff about the mom, Haruko, that I think I touched on earlier. Haruko doesn't want to get too close to her because one day Mizusu might be taken away by her father, so she doesn't want the loneliness to come as a shock. And with her weird condition slash curse thing, she has even more reason not to get too close. Over time, she has come to love Mizusu, but she believes herself to have nothing to offer, and was not cut out to be a parent. But now, she wants to fully take her in as her child. I don't understand why Haruko couldn't just tell Yukito that she was going to Mizusu's father's family estate. Maybe it's because she's, I don't know, the writers want to use the excuse that she's a really emotionally distant person or something, but I don't know. It was just odd for her to leave the way she did. Sometimes the way these characters act towards certain situations is very odd, but I'll delve into that in a sec. I gotta say, I do enjoy this character, and I do think that she does make sense, but the whole never give, the child a present thing was slightly forced. It looked like Mizusu has other toys, so maybe the mom just didn't want to do the whole birthday present thing, I don't know. But it just felt like the writers just wanted to, force the severity of the situation. Like, why can't Haruko just talk about what she thinks and feels and what her plans are? Like, it's so silly. But I definitely can empathize with her, and I think that her character had a fair amount of realism to her. I felt like I have met people like this in real life, not, act like her in real life. Her personality was fairly believable and realistic. So, Mizusu is getting weaker and weaker, and it is then where Yukito starts to flash back to his mom telling him that he needs to find and help the sad winged girl in the sky. At this point, Yukito puts all the pieces together about the winged girl storyline, and they both realize that if he stays with her any longer, they both get sick and die. The more Mizusu loves, the more she gets sick, as well as the other person. So ridiculous. Now, this is where I start to get more frustrated and cynical with the show. I watched this show twice, some episodes multiple times, and I gotta say, I did enjoy it more the second watch through, mainly because I understood the themes better and I appreciated the setup. However, something has always felt off about the show to me, and I couldn't quite place my finger on it. Finally, at one point or another, during my, my second watch through, I finally realized what it was. At first, I thought the show was pretentious, but then I realized myself to be only partly wrong. I do think that the show gets fairly pretentious and full of itself towards the end, but earlier on the themes and messaging wasn't too bad. It then dawned on me that the show is just the definition of contrived. Of course, when I searched contrived on Google, it said that contrived means, deliberately created rather than arising naturally or spontaneously. Created or arranged in a way that seems artificial or unrealistic. It was then when I read this that it perfectly described that weird vibe that the show gave me. Everything that happened with the plot and the characters just seemed to happen in an extraordinarily unnatural way. The whole story was told in a very interestingly artistic way that highlighted the characters and themes. However, when you focus on the details, things just seem way too spontaneous and unnatural that the whole thing feels artificial. For example, let's go back to the beginning of the show where Mizusu meets Yukito. Just think for a second about how weird all the interactions are. Oh look, a delirious homeless person. Who knows who he is? He could be dangerous, but maybe he could be my best friend. I know I'm just a middle schooler, but heck, let's mingle with this older dude. And then the dude is kind of a dick, wants her to go away, but she still continues to follow this weird homeless guy. And to top it all off, she invites the stranger over to her house. And then her mom comes home and asks her if he could stay with them. Just imagine if your preteen daughter brought home some homeless traveler in his 20s over your house and asked if he could stay the night. The scenario is just so freaking ridiculous when you think about it. And I could understand, I guess, maybe possibly how this order of events could seem more natural, but I don't know. The way it was done was just very contrived and unnatural. What saves it for me are the characters. They are very likable and interesting, but the way one thing led to another was just very strange. And then the mom asked the stranger to look after her daughter and walk her to and from school. Don't get me wrong, I like the beginning of the show, but still, just like I said earlier, everything just has this odd vibe to it. Like the goofy scenes of Yukito roughhousing with Michiru. Or just some of the interactions with the characters just gives off a feeling of being contrived. I do think that the show works in what it's trying to do with its themes and characters, it's just kind of awkward. When Mizusu's story unfolds and wraps up, I definitely feel like the show is trying to imply a greater importance, which made the ending pretentious. When Mizusu died, I wondered if I missed something. The whole message of the show that kept being repeated seemed to be what I've been talking about all this time. Mothers are very important to one's development. We have to get over our issues and not eternalize them so that they live on for the next generation. Dreams that you don't wake up from will eventually become sad. Eventually you have to make a change and fix what was wrong. I get all that. But the death of Mizusu really stumped me for a while. Originally, I made a horrible guess that the whole winged girl storyline could be interpreted as some kind of folktale, Just like with The Boy Who Cried Wolf, it's a cautionary tale to maybe provide awareness to something people could go through, like the suffering of the motherless child will continue to cycle on or something. And as the Yukito crow thing says, it will continue to find Mizusu in the next life when the cycle starts all over again. So the question is, why didn't he save her this time? Anywho, I went on the internet just to find the general consensus of what other people thought on the ending, and interestingly enough, what they had to say confirmed in some ways some of the ways I interpreted it. Lots of other people seemed pretty on board with the two kids at the very end being a reincarnated Yukito and Mizusu. But I also found an explanation of Mizusu's whole story arc that seemed to strengthen things out and make the most sense for me. As you see with the flashback that the show goes on after episode 7, Yukito's ancestors had wished for many years to save the girl in the sky, and all those wishes had accumulated in this Uro's doll. And as Yukito's mom explained to him, this allows Yukito to make his final wish, which is to do things all over again by Mizusu's side. And I guess the consequence of that wish was that he got reincarnated into a crow earlier on in the timeline, left to watch Mizusu and not able to do much of anything to help her. Eventually, Yukito, within the crow Sora, is able to reveal himself to Mizusu for some reason. I don't know why he couldn't do that earlier. Yukito encourages her to be strong and to keep going, so that she can do whatever she needs to do to break the curse. Haruko shows up, and the rest of the arc is about Mizusu going all the way until her life gives out, making sure that she dies happy with her family as opposed to being sad and alone, which was the fate of the girl in the sky, who had been reincarnated all those 1,000 years up to that point. As a result of her dying happy, the curse breaks, I guess. Which brings good memories back to the Kana spirit, which was the winged girl in the sky, for the first time, thus ending the cycle. This is what the goal scene at the end, when Mizusu dies, was all about. When we go back to the two kids we see playing on the day before Yukito meets Mizusu, it is basically implied that they are the reincarnation of Yukito and Mizusu. As with the crow and Yukito, it was established that multiple of their reincarnations can exist simultaneously, so it's implied that they are now free from the curse. They are free to move on from the vicious cycle that plagued the last generation. I like the ending, but it does get really preachy and melodramatic, and I just don't think the sadness was really all that fully earned. Don't get me wrong, the death was sad, but of course it is. The ending right before the finale really meandered, and part of me doesn't really like how Mizusu couldn't just heal herself some way other than dying. Something about the whole thing just seemed a tad bit forced. I get the point of it all, I just think anime puts in a lot of things that are sure to be tearjerkers. I have to say, it was a very satisfying conclusion to the characters at least. I did, however, really like the very end when we see the two kids walk off into the title. Why couldn't the show just explain itself a little more thoroughly? I think that maybe someone should have mentioned something about the curse being broken, and that good memories will be sent up to the girl in the sky. And Yukito turning into a crow just doesn't make any sense. The show really just gives you the sense that it wanted to be hard to understand, just for the sake of it. And in the end, the show goes on, but it isn't really saying anything of all that worthwhile. Now that's all well and good, but I just wanted to obnoxiously point something out. Give me a chance to explain this one because it's a doozy. I think that Air is essentially a pedo harem anime. The show is essentially about a stranger who wanders into town and solves schoolgirls' problems, in which there is slight romantic tension between all of them. It's based on a light novel in which, I could confirm this, where Yukito fucks Kano. I think there were sex scenes with some of the other girls as well. When the game was re-released, the sex scenes were taken out and replaced with more character-building stuff. In my opinion, I still think that some of the sexual aspects of the story are still somewhat weirdly baked into old versions of the story. All the fans try and say that the girls are 16 or something despite looking even younger. Even their uniforms look more like middle school, Japanese uniforms, but I mean, what do I know? I guess I'm not Japanese, so I don't know, but it just looks like to me compared to, with other shows I've seen. Back in the Minagi arc, Yukito basically says to Minagi, try to work it out with your mom, and if it doesn't work, you could travel the world with me. I guess you could argue that he didn't mean romantically, but I beg to differ. Even when he returned to Mizusu, it feels as if he loves her in a different way. It's supposed to be portrayed like he is some kind of older brother figure, and it does work from time to time, but there are always these little moments that are odd. Some websites try to say that Yukito could be 17, but as some events in the show unfold, we know that he should be at least 20 or something. The character is accused a couple of times of being a pervert, and when the adult women scold him, the way they speak, and the way he speaks about the kids, says to me that he is some kind of an adult. And yes, some people are tall when they're young, but with everything else we talked about, plus the height, I have fully gathered that Air is a pedo sim. I mean, their souls do end up together in the end. I mean, they're very obviously, there's far too much of an age difference for Yukito and Mizusu to date, when the story starts out, but, when they're reincarnated, they're the same age, and now they're dating. That's, of course, that's bad. With that odd realization aside, I did like the show, but like with what I talked about, I do think that it is kind of a try-hard art piece that is very contrived and gets fairly pretentious as it moves along. But I did enjoy the themes, and I thought that it made a decent point. I would give this one a 5.7 out of 10. It doesn't quite do enough to be acceptably decent or rule of cool, but I do think it is worth your time. A lot of it is pretty average and, fairly mediocre, but there are decent elements mainly pertaining to the characters that I think could be worth your while. I mean, it is only 12 episodes. If you're a hardcore anime watcher and you gobble up anime like it's nobody's business, then I think you should check this one out. It's definitely not trash, and I wouldn't call it shit. The show was successfully emotional at times, and the themes weren't too bad, but it was full of itself with all its artsiness, and I dare say that it doesn't offer anything too unique aside from maybe Mizusu and Haruko. On to the next with this Moe trilogy.